We have walked a long path from authoritarianism to free and open democracy. And that
Like many of us, award-winning filmmaker Vanessa Hope discovered Taiwan as a student and fell in love. But unlike many of us, her fondness for Taiwan inspired her to ask for and get unprecedented access to former President Tsai Ing-wen. The result? The documentary Invisible Nation. She shares her story in this week's edition of Taiwan Talk.
My interest in Taiwan began when I lived in Taiwan for the first time as a student, which happened to be 1995 to 96, which was the year Taiwan held their first direct presidential elections. And I had previously studied and lived in Beijing. So I was completely taken aback and fascinated. And I asked my Mandarin language teacher to loan me this brand new camera she had just bought, and she was showing us at our language school. She was very excited about, and she said, please go ahead. And I ran around filming during the inauguration weekend of Li Donghui. It was so fun to run around capturing this. Da-en Gongyuan was also right there, and there was this live drumming and concerts, and outdoor movies were happening, and operas. Like, there was just spontaneous eruption of culture and celebration that was very fun to film, and a lot of that footage actually made it into this feature film, Invisible Nation.
Okay, I was going to ask about that. How much of that footage made it in?
Not much, but we try to show you a little bit of the history of how Taiwan came to build its democracy. And we do show you Li Donghui, and that inauguration weekend footage made it in.
Okay, so describe the whole filming process. Obviously, we know that some of that original footage made it in, but what was the rest of it like for you?
Well, there is one other film I made first, which was as a director. That is called All Eyes and Ears, and feels like a more applicable title every day. Although that term, eyes and ears, is an American term for consulates on the ground. And that film was looking at the U.S.-China diplomatic relationship following then President Obama's U.S. ambassador. And I covered Taiwan a little bit in that story because of the fact of the US selling arms to Taiwan upsetting Beijing. But I knew Taiwan had its own story that was incredibly important, that I hadn't really been taught in school, despite studying East Asian history since high school, actually. And I even worked at a think tank on foreign policy called the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. And I did write an op-ed about missile defense in Taiwan, but I was very much of the school of thinking that engaging China was best, including for Taiwan, and therefore missile defense wasn't necessary. And this was back in the 90s, late 90s, and China would become a friendly neighbor. However, after I finished that first film, I was tracking developments in Taiwan. So I thought it might be possible that Taiwan would elect a first female president in January 2016. And I was able to join this international delegation to monitor that the elections were free and fair. And that was a way to be there on the ground. I have journalist friends who introduced me to local cinematographers I worked with. And I had an incredible trip, actually, filming with all the different parties, watching the elections, showing up when President Tsai won. And I had no idea she would win. And when I witnessed it and was standing in that crowd with everyone lighting up their phones and wanting to light up Taiwan, I thought, this is so historic. Again, I was there at this historic moment in 96, and again a historic moment in 2016, and it felt like important beyond belief to capture, even as an outsider, that knowing Taiwan's story wasn't well known to international audiences. And this might be an opportunity to share it in a way on a level that would reach people abroad, felt meaningful. So I hatched this idea of being able to find access to Taiwan's first female president.
What are your most standout memories from that whole filming process? And I'm not just talking about the stuff that made it to camera, but the stuff also that didn't.
I honestly feel so fortunate to have been invited in and embraced the way that I was and our whole film crew was, because it was, first of all, an extremely different experience from filming with an ambassador, even positively looking at diplomacy. In China, you cannot get access to their top level leadership and have them speak about policy or anything in an honest way with a film crew. But in Taiwan, it was hilarious. The very first experiences we had in the presidential office building were filming a Power to the People exhibit that was on display that was actually showing the history of how Taiwan became a democracy, but emblazoned on the floor of the lobby of the presidential office building was Power to the People. And I felt that everywhere with everyone I was able to interview in Taiwan. It's really inspiring. And at a time when the US had failed to elect a first female president in 2016 and sadly began this sad trajectory that we are currently on with Trump. But in Taiwan, I was able to meet young leaders, established leaders, people on the street, all of whom spoke with such passion for Taiwan and all that it represents and can achieve. And it's astounding how quickly it's become a democracy that is a guiding light in Asia. Passing same-sex marriage, we were there in the crowd at one of those rallies, and we were like, what? I mean, it was so impressive. So in the middle of it, it's not in the film, but we were, after B. Kim Shao finishes speaking, and you see in our film, the wild rainbow colors and all these wildly happy people practically sobbing, hugging each other. Some are sobbing while hugging each other. A giant rainstorm came like 5 minutes later, but we don't show you the giant rainstorm.
What are your hopes for Invisible Nation? What would you like to see with it?
Well, we are in our third year of release, and that's remarkable. For context, for example, we released in Taiwan on June 13th. I mean, theatrically with a Taiwanese distributor this year. And normally films play theatrically in Taiwan, even in most countries now, like 2 weeks maximum. And we lasted over 3 months in movie theaters because of demand and interest and word of mouth. And somehow we became Taiwan's third most popular, highest grossing documentary ever in their history. And so, as an American who was obviously working very closely with Taiwanese team members and never would have made this film without that collaboration, I'm still blown away because it feels like the most meaningful validation of our ability to listen, like listening to what is actually happening and going on the ground in a country right now feels so important. And, when I first interviewed Freddie Lim, I just want to shout out how blown away I was by his youthful enthusiasm for change and progress and his frustration actually with being a legislator at the time, because older generations get so stuck. And that's what holds progress back is when the conversation can't happen, and the older generations aren't listening to the younger generations. And in the history of American foreign policy, certainly it's a lot of getting stuck and not paying attention to what is going on the ground and in these countries that we're dealing with. And it is idealistic to believe that we should be focused on people, not money, that we should care about human rights and we should care about democracy and these universal values. But it is possible and it should be the way. And we know we can do it if we don't have bad people leading and in power. So
The first time you touched a camera, 20 years before you did Invisible Nation. So there's a 20-year gap from the time Lee Teng-hui was ascended to the presidency to the time uh, Taiwan became president. What, from your perspective, changed and what stayed the same?
in Taiwan,
Yeah, yeah. From the first time you touched a camera to the last time you touched a camera here, what changed and what stayed the same?
wow. In a way, I attempt to address that in the film. I mean, I could go into so much detail, but I find that that question is a bit hard for me to answer because it's so huge. If you have a specific area you're thinking about or you want me to address, I can try, but I feel like the whole film itself is trying to show you where Taiwan was and where it is now. So I'm not sure which part I should answer
What about
in.
personal standpoint? What would you say to that? How have you changed, or how has being here changed you, seeing what you saw and hearing what you heard?
For me, seeing what I saw and hearing what I heard in Taiwan taught me about resilience, about the power of community and working together to make progress, and about the importance of good leadership, which is not based on punishment and discipline and authoritarian fascist almost methods, which we're unfortunately experiencing now in the United States, but can be based on compassion and empathy and understanding for a community and caring for the people who you include completely all groups, that there's no sense of excluding any particular group for their beliefs or any particular proclivities, that you care to unite a people around shared values and having moral clarity in your leadership too. I mean, we didn't cover healthcare in Taiwan, but that is something, well, except in the sense of COVID, which Taiwan also handled extremely well. But, we didn't put a graph up there saying Taiwan has the world's best, least expensive healthcare, but it does. Um, and this was continually impressing me, just meeting everyone in Taiwan and meeting people who wanted to go into government. I think probably before I made this film, I was more cynical about entering politics and being able to make a difference. And after meeting all the people I did in Taiwan and interviewing them and seeing them grow over the course of President Tsai's 2 terms, I really do believe that you can make a difference as a public servant and you can go in and improve how your country operates. And it's so wrong how Taiwan has been treated on the world stage. And again, this is, I believe, a factor of policy getting stuck and thinking getting stuck or intentionally held back. I mean, there are forces that don't want progress and don't want the world to run on human rights and valuing people over profit. But I think that Taiwan is leading the way for good, and I hope more people can experience and learn from Taiwan through our film. And we're very excited to share that the distribution in the United States is going to be huge because it's going to be on PBS in May, and that will reach 97% of households here, which will be phenomenal because one of the main experiences everyone on our crew, myself included, have had when traveling with the film is that audiences everywhere around the world, and we've played over 50 film festivals, they still do not know the difference between Taiwan and Thailand, or they don't know that Taiwan has its own history and is not part of China, the People's Republic of China. And they don't know what a powerful democracy Taiwan is, or even semiconductor chip manufacturing and its importance. All of that is sort of still invisible to the majority of people in the world. And it's Taiwan's exclusion from the major international organizations, including World Health and Civil Aviation and Interpol, is just a negative for the world and an injustice that needs to be corrected.
You were listening to U.S. filmmaker Vanessa Hope. I'm Hope Go. Thank you for tuning in.